Okay, so why don't we get started? So today is the last lecture. Obviously, we'll talk about one final topic, distributed system security, and then we'll wrap up there. A reminder that we have the exam next week. I'm going to send a detailed email about this, so you have all the information you need. But by and large, it's the same kind of instructions I sent for the midterm, closed book, closed notes. For most of the students, it will be in person. There are a few students who are taking the online masters. They'll have Zoom proctored exam. You can still bring one sheet of paper with any notes that you want to the lecture. I mean, not the lecture, to the exam. And it's going to have a similar format to the midterm. I will make a sample exam available soon. So you have about a week to review it. I think the exam is a week from today, if I'm not mistaken, the 15th. Okay. All right. So with that, let's get started with the last topic here, distributed system security. So we'll talk about 2 or 3 things today. One is basic concepts in security. You may have seen those in a different class that focuses entirely on security, but just so that you are all on the same page, I'm going to review those basic concepts before we take those and try to build that into higher level issues that are relevant to us for distributed systems. Okay, so we'll start with simple things like authentication and encryption and things of that sort, and then build from there. Okay, so let's start with, before we even start, let me first explain the difference between security and privacy. Okay, sometimes you conflate the two, think that they're of course related concept, but they are not one and the same. So I'll give you an example. So let's say that you have some credit card information with the merchant. Okay, that data gets hacked, so your credit card information is leaked. Okay, so do you feel that is a security attack, is a security problem, or a privacy problem? Okay, so first thing is your credit card data is private, right? So in some sense there is loss of privacy, but the real problem is that somebody attacked the security of the system and stole data. So it really starts as more of a security problem. Okay, of course the security breach has privacy implication, there's no question, because your private data got stolen. Okay? But it starts off more as a security problem than a privacy problem. Okay, so there's elements of both, but it's largely a security issue. But the opposite you will see is not necessarily true. Many times security issues can cause privacy problems, but there are privacy leakages that have nothing to do with security at all. Okay, so just to show you, there are actually two different things. So here's a simple example. You have mobile apps on your phone. Okay, many of these apps track your location. Okay, so the developer of this app has data that actually shows where you have gone and all of this, and you consent to this because when the app is installed, it asks you, can you share your location? So it's not like they took this data without your consent. Okay, so now someone else knows a lot about locations you visit and so on. Okay, that can be a privacy leakage. So suppose you go to a hospital, okay, for some medical issue, somebody else now knows that you visited a hospital or something like that, right? So sensitive information can get leaked. Okay, in this case that's a privacy violation. Okay, but there's no security problem here. Okay, because you actually, nobody collected this data in an unauthorized manner, you did consent to it. So this should give you some sense of the difference between privacy and security. Okay, security problems sometimes have privacy implications, but often have nothing to do with that. They just are security problems, and you can have privacy problems that have no implications on security at all. So distinct concepts. Okay, here's another example. You can have anonymous browsing data. Okay, sometimes that data you think that is anonymous because you are in private mode and so on. Okay, but it's actually easy to de-anonymize that data, because sometimes users might go to a certain site and use that site to go to another site, because the way you browse might be correlated. So even though data is anonymous, you can figure out where they are be. Or you might actually have trained a machine learning model. Okay, and if you just send certain inputs to that model, you can actually figure out what type of training data was used to train it. Okay, even though you don't have access to the training data, but just by looking at a model and sending it, probing its probing that model through some inputs, you can figure things out. Right? So lots of privacy attacks that have nothing to do with security. Okay? Lots of security attacks that sometimes leak privacy, sometimes don't leak privacy. So keep in mind that they are distinct concepts. I just want to mention this because last time there was some confusion between whether something was a security issue or privacy issue. Okay? Now, with that said, today's class is actually about security, so we'll not talk about privacy at all. Okay? So let's start with the first problem. These are just basics. Okay? So first problem is authentication. Okay? Now, any system that you build, distributed system, to prevent unauthorized access, you need to have authentication. Right? Typically, it's username and password. So your site, which could be an e-commerce application or some other site, needs to only allow users who are authorized to access it. You can do the same thing if you want to log into a machine and so on. So how does this work? Okay? So here is a simple example of authentication, which of course doesn't work. So somebody calls you on the phone, says they're calling from your bank, they need some sensitive information. Maybe in this case is asking for your ATM card or something like that, or debit card. Okay? So obviously you shouldn't give this information to somebody on the phone. But first, the bigger question is not that you should not reveal private information, but how do you know whoever is calling is actually from the bank or not? Just because they claim to be calling from the bank, you don't know whether they are actually calling from the bank or not. Right? So you could just pretend to be calling from the bank and try to make you reveal important information. Many phishing attacks do the same thing. Right? They don't use the phone, but they send you an email that masquerades to be somebody else. Okay? So you need authentication for all kinds of things. So our first version of the protocol, we will use, by the way, computer security terminology, which are essentially two entities that are interacting. We'll call them Alice and Bob. They don't have to be people. They can be machines with those names, but those are the entities that are interacting here. Okay, so for this purpose, they could be machines. Okay, so if Alice just sends a message to Bob saying, I'm Alice, okay, Bob doesn't know whether that's actually Alice or not. That's the same problem as the bank. So intruder, Trudy in this case, could also claim to be Alice, and Bob can just let this intruder log into the system. Okay, so clearly that just giving usernames doesn't work. Okay? There are many systems that try to authenticate you by your IP address. They would say, which IP address are you sending me messages from? And I can use that to do some sort of authentication. Okay? Now, that is also not a good strategy because it's very easy to do what is called IP address spoofing, okay, where you can change the source address of the packet to send this information. When we were looking at web clusters, remember I was talking about doing TCP handoffs where you could change the IP address so that the server thinks the packet came from some other machine. So you can do all of these things for good reasons and bad reasons. So just using network IP addresses to identify who the user is that's accessing the system, not the best idea. Okay? So the most common approach, of course, is to use a password. Right? So you can say, if you say I'm a user, or I say I'm Alice, then Bob, in this case, a machine will say, okay, give me your password. So then you can enter a password. Okay? Now, often, okay, this is not good in itself, because if your password is going in clear text over the network, okay, somebody can intercept it. Okay? And then now they know your password, so they can then use your username and password to log in. Okay? Many early protocols did not actually encrypt the traffic. So if you are connected to a machine, you can enter your username, password, that just goes unencrypted. So anyone who captures those packets can actually see the plain text of that message and see username and password. Okay? Even web services that don't use HTTPS use plain HTTP. Okay? Everything is going in plain text. Okay? All the protocols you built for lab 1 or 2 or 3 that use REST, it's all unencrypted. Okay? All the messages, if somebody actually captures it in the mail, can see everything that's going back and forth. Okay? Because that's all in plain text. So just sending usernames and passwords in plain text or network, bad idea, because intruders can capture your packets and then figure out what passwords are. Okay? So what do you usually do? You are going to encrypt this traffic. Okay? So this brings us to an encryption algorithm. So we'll use encryption to do authentication. But let me say a few words about encryption. I presume you heard the term encryption. Okay, what does it mean? Okay, so typically what encryption algorithms do is that they take some text, any arbitrary text, they apply a function to that text, and then they get a new transform version of the text that's called ciphertext. Okay, typically an encryption algorithm, okay, you need something called a key that will basically be used to generate this transform version of the original message. Okay, and then you need that key to actually decrypt the message. Okay, so the function is the same, but it can use different keys. Okay, so if you use a certain key, it will take some text, okay, any arbitrary message. You can say hello world, you apply the encryption function, it will give you some other string. Okay, and you have to have a key. If then what you do is, if you want to recover the original message, you use a decryption algorithm, which often is the same as the encryption algorithm. The function is often the same. You take the decrypted message, also not the decrypted message, the encrypted message, you use the same function with the key, it gives you back the original. Okay, this is what a typical encryption algorithm does. Okay, the function is typically well known. The secret is not in the function that you're applying. The encryption algorithm is well known. The secret is the key. Okay, if you keep your key safe, okay, then just because somebody knows that this encrypted text was generated by this algorithm, which is already well known, that it doesn't let them decrypt it. Okay, that's the basic idea. We'll get back to this in a few minutes, but assume you know now what an encryption algorithm is. Let's assume that there is a key that is now known to both Alice and Bob. Okay, the key is known to both of these parties. So now we can use encryption to do authentication. So Alice is going to send a message to Bob saying, I am Alice. Okay, but it's now encrypted with the secret key. Okay, there's an encryption algorithm, and then there's a secret key. So you use the encryption algorithm and the secret key. So you send the encrypted version of this string. Okay, Bob is going to then decrypt the message. Okay, and then he in this case will see that the message says I'm Alice. That allows Bob to authenticate Alice, because in this case it's assumed that the secret key is only known to Alice and Bob. So this tells Bob that only Alice could have sent this message, okay, no one else, right? Because only Alice and Bob know the decryption and encryption keys, which in this case are the same. Is that clear, what I just said? Okay. Now, although this algorithm is secure in the sense of only Bob and Alice know the key, okay, it's still vulnerable to attacks. Okay. Here's the problem. What if an intruder actually intercepts the encrypted message saying I'm Alice? Okay. So I take this message that is just sent. This is the encrypted version of the string, I'm Alice. So I have this message. At some later time, Trudy can just present this message to Bob. Okay. Bob will decrypt the message and figure out that it came from Alice, because only Alice knows the key. Okay. And now an intruder has gotten into the system. Is this clear? Okay. So this authentication protocol, even if you use very secure algorithms, okay, the problem is not with this encryption algorithm. Problem is that you intercepted an encrypted message and you did what is called a replay attack. You just presented that encrypted message again, and then someone else actually accepted it as a valid message. So this is not a problem with the encryption algorithm, not a problem with the key. Neither the encryption algorithm was broken, nor the key was known. You just took a decrypted packet and represented it and authenticated it. Okay? So clearly that should not happen. So in this case, this is the equivalent of if you send your username and password encrypted, okay, and then you later on someone else intercepts it and sends the same message, they can actually get into the system, even though you're using encryption. Okay, so these replay attacks are often called man in the middle attack or person in the middle attack, okay, because there is an intruder sitting in between, intercepting your messages and then using them for bad purposes later on. Okay, so encryption by itself did not help, even though there was no problem here with the encryption. Is that clear? So what can we do? Okay, make something expire. Okay, so here is what we are going to do. We are going to use what are called one-time passwords. Okay, basically, if you use the same message or the same password multiple times, they are always vulnerable to replay attacks. Somebody can capture it and represent it. If you're reusing your passwords, then you're going to be vulnerable to this replay attack. So we will use one-time password, which means the password is never going to be reused. It's only used once and never again. Okay. The way we are going to do this is we are going to use what is called a nonce. It's a once in a lifetime number. Okay. Think of it as an integer. Okay. But this integer is only going to be used once per user. Okay. So you can use them across users, but for each user you will use it only once. And here's how it's going to work. Okay. So this is version 4 of our authentication protocol. Alice will send a message to Bob saying, I am Alice, unencrypted. Okay, the message, that's your username. So you type your username, it goes unencrypted. Okay. Bob, which is the machine, is going to generate a once in a lifetime nonce, which is an integer, okay, only to be used once, never again for this session. Okay. So you will send n, which is that integer, back to Alice saying, prove that you are Alice. Here's a number. Okay. Now Alice is going to encrypt that number. Not in the previous case, Alice had either encrypted the username or their password. In this case, Alice is actually going to encrypt that nonce and send it back. Okay. The encryption algorithm and the key are still only the key is still only known to Alice and Bob. Okay. So Bob will now decrypt the message and then re-extract the nonce. Okay. This is going to validate that the message actually came from Alice. Okay. Since you are using this nonce, never be used again. Anyone who intercepts this nonce, they can't do anything with that, because next time you use a different nonce. If you presented the previous message, it won't actually let you authenticate yourself. Is that clear? Okay. So this requires you to have so this is the nonce is in this case just an integer, but it acts like a one-time password that you're using. It's also sometimes called a challenge response. So it's a challenge number that you send an encrypted version of that number. Any questions here? Yes. Can there be a possibility when Okay. The question is, can there be a possibility where A and B are exchanging keys and somebody else can get the key? So I'm going to come to that. Okay. Key exchange and how to make it secure. You're absolutely right. If you actually don't have this keys exchange securely, then you have a problem with the encryption algorithm, not the password increase. Encryption algorithm key is known to someone else. So at this point, we're assuming it's securely known only to Alice and Bob, okay, not to anyone else. So if you assume that this protocol is secure, but if you make the key itself vulnerable, then you have other problems. Okay, so that's one technique. Okay, this uses what are called symmetric encryption algorithms. Okay, which means it's the same algorithm, only one key. You can take a string, apply the encryption algorithm, get what's called ciphertext, and then apply the same function and the key you get back. So it's a reversible function. Okay, your question? Yes. The nonces need to be truly random. They don't need to be random at all. They just need to be used once and never again. Okay? Because if somebody captures this decrypted message, it should be useless to them. You can even generate the non-sequential. Okay? But you cannot. Once you use 5, you can never use 5 again, because somebody could have stored the decrypted or the encrypted version of 5. So if you use 5 next time, they have the encrypted version, they can present it. So that you should not. But they don't have to be random. It's not a random number. It's a once in a lifetime number, which is different from a random number. Okay? Not reusable is the way to think about it, not random. Okay. Anything else here? All right. So we will now talk about a different approach to doing the same thing. This just changes the encryption algorithm, okay, to something else. So what I talked about on the previous slide uses what's called symmetric encryption algorithm, okay, which means that it's the same function. There's one key that's used for both encryption and decryption. The encryption key and the decryption key are one and the same. Okay, these are called symmetric key encryption algorithms, but there are asymmetric encryption algorithms, which means that there's a different encryption and decryption key. Okay, so it's they come in pairs. So you essentially generate an encryption key and you have to have a decryption key. Whoever is sending encrypted messages has the encryption key. Whoever needs to decrypt the message has the decryption key. Okay, so you use the encryption key to encrypt, then you will need the decryption key. So there are keys come in pairs in this case, rather than a single key that's being used to do both. Okay? So there is a whole class of these algorithms, but the one that's popular is called public key cryptography. Okay? So these are called essentially, this is a class of algorithms where you generate your encryption key and your decryption key. Your encryption key is essentially called a public key, and the decryption key is called a private key. So the decryption key is only known to you. You don't give it to anybody else. That's your secret. Okay? So only you can decrypt messages that are sent to you. The encryption key is called your public key. You can make it widely available. Everyone can have access to your public key. Okay? So the idea is if somebody wants to send you a message, they first have to get your public key. Okay? And you made it public. You put it on your website or whatever you want to do. You can send it via email. They have to use your public key. Then they use the public key to encrypt some message and they send it to you. Since the decryption key is only known to you, this message is useless to anyone else. They cannot get the original message out of it. Only you can decrypt them. That's the basic idea. Okay? So I'm going to call this public and private keys. Okay? Now it so happens that although I call them encryption key and decryption key, they're actually reversible in that I can use my private key to encrypt something. The public key can actually decrypt it. But for this purpose, we don't need to worry about it. Okay? So they are actually, so it is symmetric as is shown here. So you can first use one key to encrypt, the other key can decrypt it. But the way it's typically used is one key is secret, you keep it, the other key you give to someone else. Whatever you give to someone else is called the public key. Okay? But you remember that you could encrypt something and send it, and then somebody else can use it to your public key to decrypt it. And we'll see a use case why you need public key to decrypt. Normally, you should use public key to encrypt. Okay? With that background, let's first talk about authentication. Then we'll see why the reversible thing is important. Okay? Same technique as before. Alice sends a message to Bob, okay, saying, I'm Alice. That's the username. Okay? Bob generates once in a lifetime nonce, which is an integer. His challenge saying, here is an integer, prove that you're Alice. Alice is going to take, in this case, her private key, okay, and encrypt it. Okay? Saying, I basically take my private key and I've encrypted it, send it to Bob. Okay? Now, Bob has to verify this is Alice. So Bob has to first get Alice's public key, which is public. Anyone can get the public. Okay? So Bob can then take the public key and decrypt it and get back the nonce. Okay? So this is an example where you use the private key to encrypt rather than decrypt, but since it's symmetric, it doesn't matter. And Bob knows that only Alice could have sent that message, but only Alice has the other key. Okay? Note that in this case, anyone else can also decrypt that message and get the nonce. Okay? But getting the nonce is useless information. It doesn't help you do anything in this case. Okay? The public key is widely known, so anyone can decrypt a message that Alice sent, but that's okay. Only Bob can actually make use of it, saying, yes, that came from Alice. Is this clear? The same protocol as before. Okay? You don't need to share private keys beforehand in like the previous technique. You just need to make your public key available. Your private key stays with you. And then anyone, in this case, Bob, can figure out who it is. Yeah, yes, question. Yes. Question is only one of the messages is encrypted in the current setup. Even in the previous case, there's only one message encrypted. That's the nonce. Username not encrypted. Okay? Doesn't matter whether you encrypt or not, because all that will happen is if you masquerade as somebody else, okay, you will get the nonce unless you have that person's private key. You can't actually authenticate as them. Okay? So username in this case does not have to go encrypted. This is not it can, but it doesn't have to. It's a minimal protocol. Only message that's encrypted is the one where you're sending the encrypted version of the nonce to authenticate. Okay? Same is true in both cases, whether you're using public key cryptography or symmetric encryption algorithm. Okay? Only one message needs to be encrypted. Everything else is going unencrypted. Okay? Normally, everything can go encrypted over a secure channel, but you don't need to. That's all this is saying. Okay? You can, but you don't need. Is this clear? Okay. So all looks good. Yeah, but even this protocol has that same problem, which is like somebody stole your key. Here, we will show a replay, different type of replay attack, okay, or a person in the middle attack. So you will assume that there is Alice and Bob that are communicating with one another. There's a third party, Trudy, that's sitting in between. Every message that Alice and Bob send to one another gets intercepted by Trudy, and then Trudy can either look at it and send another message or just pass the message on, and whatever Trudy wants to do can happen. So here's what could happen. Okay? Alice sends a message, or in this case, actually, Trudy sends a message to Bob saying, "I'm Alice." Okay? So Bob is going to send back a nonce back to Trudy. Okay? Now, Trudy does not have Alice's private key. Okay? But Bob has to actually get the public key first. Otherwise, Bob cannot decrypt the nonce. Okay? So while the nonce goes to Alice, Bob has to go also fetch the private key from, sorry, not the private, the public key from somewhere to do the final step to decrypt the nonce. Okay? This is where Trudy can actually send her public key pretending that it is Alice's public. Okay? Because all that Bob is doing is going and trying to fetch the key. Trudy can intercept that message and actually send back her key rather than Alice's key. So in this case, Bob now believes that Trudy's key is Alice's key. So this has now made things easy. Trudy can just encrypt the nonce with her private key, send it over, okay, game over. Right? So basically, you use an incorrect public key to extract the nonce and validate Trudy as Alice. Okay? So this goes back to the same question that was asked. The problem in this protocol is not that public key cryptography is broken. It's very secure. Okay? The problem in this case is key distribution. Okay? Because somehow you are able to fool Bob and send the wrong key, you could authenticate as someone else. Okay? So key distribution is just as important as the encryption algorithm. Okay? So you can have very secure encryption algorithms, but if you have bad ways to send keys around, okay, you cannot actually maintain the safeguard of or maintain the safety of that algorithm. Okay? This is like you have let's say you buy a big lock and put it on your front door. Okay? But then you put the key under the mat. Okay? That doesn't help your security. Where somebody found the key, they can enter your house. Right? Same problem. The keys have to be safeguarded just as much as having a secure encryption algorithm. Okay? So we'll have to see how to do that part, because we have not talked about how keys are distributed. Both this protocol and the previous one have that problem. If the keys are not securely exchanged, then you are going to have problems. Is this clear? Okay. So let's now talk about, we'll talk about key distribution in just a second, but we'll talk about another use of using public and private keys, that is to have digital signatures. Okay? So just as you can sign a document with a pen, okay, you know now you can actually sign documents electronically. So how do you do that? Right? So you can essentially use public key cryptography to sign documents. Okay? So here's a very simple approach. Let's say you want to sign a document or a message. A message, document, doesn't matter. All of them are just strings. It's just a set of bytes that you're signing. Okay? So what will happen is Alice is going to send a message to Bob saying sign this message. Bob is going to take their private key, okay, and then encrypt that entire message with the private key. Okay? So in this case, the encrypted version of the message also serves as the signature. Okay? Because now anyone can take Bob's public key, okay, and then take that encrypted message and decrypt it. Okay? So, and only Bob could have encrypted that message. So the act of encrypting that message with their private key also serves as a signature, because only you can perform that action. Okay? So in this case, we are equating encrypting a message to signing that message. Okay? So to sign the message, you simply encrypt it. Okay? Then the question is, what does this? Does this actually serve the purpose of what a signature is supposed to be? What does a signature do? Okay? So there are two things that you need from a signature. First is, you cannot sign something and then later claim that you did not sign it. Okay? Because if you sign a check, if you tell the bank you didn't sign it, the bank can show you check saying, look, there's a signature. Of course, we are not thinking of somebody counterfeiting your signature in the physical world, but let's say you have a good signature that's hard to counterfeit. Okay? So once you sign it, you're done. And then somebody else can actually take a signed version and verify that you signed it as well. Okay? So it should tell somebody else that you signed it, and you should not be able to deny that you signed it once you did. Those are the true properties of a signature. Here, if you use your private key, both of those two are true. Okay? Once you sign it with your private key, then you can't claim you didn't sign it because only you could have encrypted it. Okay? And then someone else can verify that you did sign it by using your public key, which is well known. Right? So I can just decrypt that message and say, look, I have that original message, so this must be your signature. Is that clear? Any questions here? Okay. So this is the simplest version of digital signature, is you just use public and private keys to sign a message. Okay? But it's not the most efficient one. Okay? The reason is public key cryptography is very secure, and hence encryption and decryption is very expensive. Okay? So if you had a 100-page document you're signing, okay, there's going to be a lot of computational overhead into encrypting that entire document, and that encrypted version serves as the signature of the original document. So can we make this process more efficient? Okay, that's the question we want to ask. Okay? For this, we are going to use something called a message digest. Okay? So what is a message digest? Message digest is essentially a hash of a message. Okay? That's what a digest. Digest essentially means summary. Okay? So we will use hashing. You know what a hash function does, right? It takes an arbitrary string, okay, and you apply that hash function, it gives you a fixed length string that serves as the hash of the original message. Okay? So what we will do is we'll just use a hash function. Okay? We'll use a good hash function, and that hash function will allow us to construct a digest of the message. Okay? So what we will now do is we make the process of digital signatures more efficient. Okay? Here is how we'll do it. So suppose that you want to digitally sign a message M. Okay? To do that, rather than directly signing the message by encrypting it, we'll first compute the hash of that message. Okay? We'll just apply the hash function, so you get H of M. Okay? And now you will actually use your private key to encrypt hash of M. Okay? So the original message M and the signed hash, okay, are going to essentially serve as our pair. So the signed hash is now your signature. In the previous case, the entire encrypted version of the message was a signature. Now your encrypted version of the hash is your signature. Is that clear? So you essentially take the message M, and then you have essentially signed the hash. Now anyone can verify you signed this document or your message, because they can take your public key, they can decrypt this hashed entity and get back hash of M. They can reapply the hash on the original message and compare the two hashes, and they will match. So that will tell them that you computed the hash and you signed the hash. Okay? So you can verify the signature. And once you sign this, you as a user cannot deny that you signed this, because only you know the private. So anyone can verify you signed it, and only you, and you cannot deny that you signed, which are the properties you want of any signature. And this digital signature is going to give you that. Is that clear? Any questions here? Okay. So we do need to talk about this hash function, because that's critical in making things better. Okay. First thing is this more efficient than the previous algorithm? And if so, why? Okay. The hash is going to be much smaller than the original document. Okay. Hash, in this case, the hash function is going to give you a fixed length string. Regardless of how large the original message is, the hash is going to be smaller and of fixed length. Okay. So it should be clear that encrypting a smaller string is more efficient than encrypting a larger string. That hopefully should be clear, right? So you can have a 100-page document, but the hash might be just 100 bytes always, or whatever, 100 bits, depends on the hash function. Okay. So encrypting a much smaller string, much more computationally efficient. Okay. So it's going to be much more efficient to run than trying to do what was on the previous slide, which was the digital signature was the encrypted version of the message itself. Okay. But there is one critical piece we need from the hashing function to make all of this work. Okay. If you know any hash function, you know that there's a chance of a collision. Okay. A collision means two messages, two independent strings to which you apply the hash function give you the same hash value. Okay, that's what a collision means. So now if I have the encrypted version of this hash, okay, if I could now find another message that gives me the same hash, okay, I can claim that you signed this message. Okay, because it gives you the same hash and you signed some hash which is an integer. You basically signed an integer, and I can generate, if I could construct another message M that gives you that same hash value, then you can, then this is not going to work well because you will claim you signed some other document or something like that. Okay, so a hash function, first of all, A, should not allow you, given a hash, you should not be able to construct some arbitrary string M that maps to it. Okay, because then I can essentially construct all kinds of arbitrary documents and claim you signed it because I have the encrypted version of that. That's not, should not happen. Hash function should not prevent you from, should prevent you from doing that. The second is that the chance of collision itself should be low. Okay, so if a hash function has low collision probability and you cannot actually reconstruct arbitrary messages that give you a hash. Given a hash, I should not be able to brute force and find a message that gives me that hash. Okay, if you have those two properties, you have a good hash function. Okay, not just for this purpose, but in general. Okay, now there are many hash functions out there that you can use. Okay, there was one that was used widely until recently. It was called MD5, stands for Message Digest 5. Still used in a few places, but not good one to use anymore. Okay, it does not actually have some of these properties because it can be easily attacked using brute force techniques. It uses hash functions are not the same as encryption algorithms, but they still use keys. Okay, and MD5 used a smaller key, which means that it's more vulnerable to brute force attack. Brute force attack simply means I am just brute force computing. I compute every string and I just apply the hash function and say, can I actually get some hash that matches it? Okay, and the longer the key, the more computationally intensive the hashing function becomes, so it's harder to attack using brute. Same with encryption algorithm. Okay, so the MD5 is not secure anymore. It's been replaced by the SHA family of hash functions. SHA is just acronym. It stands for secure hash function. So you have SHA-1, which uses a 160-bit function, then the SHA-2, which uses 256 512 bits. These are not encryption algorithms again, but they are hash functions which give you low collision probability. They are not easy to do brute force attacks to find strings that give you hash values and things of that. Okay, so if you use SHA-type functions, you can implement digital signatures very easily, like what I said in the previous slide. Is this clear? All right. So now let's talk about key exchange. Okay, how are you going to solve this problem of secure key exchange? Okay, because as I said, that is at the crux of any encryption algorithm. If you cannot securely exchange keys or securely distribute a public key, then there is nothing you can do because an intruder can attack your encryption algorithm. Yeah, so this is really just as important as choosing a good encryption algorithm. Yeah. So often what you will do is you will not keep one key for a long period of time. You might have things like session keys that are used for the purpose of that session and then thrown away. Okay, so we want to now see how can you generate session keys. Okay, so and that only Alice and Bob know, and nobody else knows. So here is one way to do it. You are going to use a third party which you trust. We'll call that third party a key distribution center or a KDC. Okay, so essentially the idea is the KDC is going to generate a key and then distribute it in a secure manner. Okay, so for this, a few things have to happen. First is Alice and Bob need to trust the KDC. Otherwise, you shouldn't ask the KDC to give you a key. Okay, but the second is we will assume that the KDC and Alice and KDC and Bob also use encryption to communicate, because the keys can't be sent unencrypted. That's not going to work either. Send unencrypted keys, somebody else can intercept the key, they know the key for it. So everything, all the communication has to be secret in that you have to use an encryption algorithm. So we'll assume that Alice and Bob both use an encryption algorithm to communicate with the KDC, and they have a predetermined key that only they and the KDC know. Okay, so Alice has a key that they have shared with the KDC. Only Alice and the KDC know that key. Bob and KDC also have pre-shared a key. Only the two of those entities know that. Okay? Assuming you have all of that set up, in this case, Alice is going to send a message to KDC saying, I'm Alice, I want to communicate with Bob, generate a session key for me. Okay? Then the KDC is going to generate some key. Okay? And then that key, which is called KAB, stands for a key that Alice and Bob can use to communicate. It's their session key. It is then encrypted with the key that only Alice and the KDC know. So that key itself goes encrypted over the network using an encryption key that was only shared between, in this case, Alice and the KDC. So it goes to Alice. Alice can then decrypt that and get it. Okay? And in this case, the key also has to be sent to Bob, saying Alice wants to talk to you. Here is the key you're going to use for communication. And that is encrypted with a different key that only the KDC and Bob. Okay? So this is one way you can exchange keys, okay, in a secure way, because everything has gone encrypted. Okay? There is no chance that someone else can intercept it and extract the key. Even if they intercept the message, they can't decrypt the message because it's encrypted with a key that only the KDC and Alice know. Is that clear? So in this, what this allows you to do is you don't need to have arbitrary keys between every pair of nodes in your net system, because you don't know who you will communicate with, and you don't have to do secure. You just share your key with the KDC, and every time you as a user or a machine want to talk to some other machine, you ask the KDC to generate the key, and the KDC has the ability to distribute it securely. Okay? So you need only n keys as opposed to n square keys. Otherwise, every two pairs will need to have a key they have exchanged in private beforehand. Okay? It makes the problem much simpler. You had a question, Miss? Yes. Yes. The question is, will the original problem not be there, where how did the Alice and the KDC generate that key securely in the first place? So that bootstrapping has to be done, and I'll come back to that in another slide. But they assume that the original bootstrapping requires that you physically go to some office, you stand in front of somebody and you exchange a key physically, and then you go. You cannot do that over the network because there is no way to secure that network. Okay? So you have to have the original exchange be done in some secure way using physical exchange or anything like that. Otherwise, this will not work. You are right. Okay? But but once you do that, you don't have to do it with every other part. Right? Because if n nodes, then that would have mean you guys go out to everyone's play office or something and exchange a key. That you can avoid by just doing it once with the KDC, and they take care of distributing keys from that point of view. Okay? But yes, that's a good question. So that's something you do have to bootstrap. Okay? Here's the same problem without a KDC. Okay? You can use public key cryptography in this case. Right? So Alice and Bob have to generate a session key. So what they're going to do is they're going to use their public and private keys to bootstrap the key without a third party. Okay? So Alice is going to send a message to Bob saying, I'm Alice, here is a nonce, okay? One-time password, an integer. That message is encrypted with Bob's public key, which Alice knows. Okay? At the moment, let's not worry about how Alice got the public key. We'll come back to that. Okay? Bob will then send back a message to Alice saying, okay, I have your nonce, okay, that's R. I'm going to send you another nonce that I generated. I also generate a session key KAB and send it back. Okay? And then Alice has to assign an ACK saying, I decrypt was encrypted using Alice's public key. So only Alice can decrypt it. Okay? And then Alice then sends back the second nonce back encrypted with the session key. At that point, the session can start. Okay? So you're using two nonces, okay, and public keys to encrypt every message that goes back and forth. So you cannot replay this because you are using nonces, so you can never actually use this for any other purpose. Okay? So you got rid of the KDC in this case. Okay? But the original problem of how did Alice and Bob securely exchange their public key still remains. Okay, because if they don't securely exchange it, the KDC, you got rid of that problem because you have a secure channel to the KDC. KDC takes care of all of it. Okay? Here, every two parties need to securely exchange. If you don't do that, then you can't generate a session. Okay, so now we'll talk about how. So because of this, yes, your question. Yeah, so you're asking what if I get a lot of random messages from someone encrypted or unencrypted that will cause some load on that. So that's called a denial of service attack. You don't need encryption for that. You could just send a server garbage request, okay, and then the server will keep processing it and just get overloaded, right? So that's not going to be solved by encryption. Because just somebody just flooding messages to a service and causing overload, a different problem. You need things like firewalls to filter out those packets, which these techniques will not address. Okay? So yes, you could flood the system with encrypted or unencrypted messages, cause other problems. Right? Okay. Any other questions? So let's talk about how are you going to exchange public keys in a secure manner. Okay? Because public key retrieval, as I showed you in the case of Trudy, is subject to this man in the middle or person in the middle attack. So how do we ensure that you can do this in a secure way? Okay? So this does require you to have a third party. It's not the same as a KDC, okay? But it's a third party that's going to sign your public key so that the public key can be verified. Okay? This is called a certificate. Okay? And if you use browsers, you will see that browsers often talk about certificates. That's where this notion of certification comes from. This third party is called a certification authority. Okay? And the idea is that everyone trusts the certification authority. Okay? So now what you do is, if you want a public key and you want to make it public, you shouldn't just publish your key. Okay? You should go to the certification authority, have them sign your key. Okay? And then you present a certificate. A certificate has actually two things. It has your name and it has your public key, and it's signed by the certification authority. So you can verify that that's actually Alice's public key. Okay? All of the problems arose because Rudy could present their public key claiming to be Alice's public. You had no way to verify, is this the right public key or the wrong public key? Now we will put in a mechanism to verify that the public key belongs to whoever they claim to be. Right? So you essentially now present a certificate. The certificate allows you to verify that it is actually the right key. You can't put some wrong key in there and claim it to be somebody else's key. That once you have a certified key, you can then publish it wherever you want. You can even put it on your website. Somebody can download it. Even if website is hacked, they replace the key, it will be signed with somebody else's name because you cannot get the certification authority to give you an incorrect key. That's the assumption that they will, when they sign a key saying it belongs to Alice, it is Alice's key. That's the general assumption. Okay? So what does the certificate have? The certificate actually uses public key cryptography as well. So we will assume that the certification authority has a private key. That's, we know how to do digital signatures already. I just showed you that, right? So the public key of the certification authority is already known. It's built into the browser because when you compile the browser, you will build the public keys into the browser. Okay? Or any other client that needs to decrypt a certificate will have the certification authority's public key built into the program. So we will not assume we need to distribute it in some unsecure way. We'll assume that it's already distributed properly. Okay? So the certificate is simply someone else's public key signed by the certification authority's private key. Okay, so that's a digital signature on that string. Okay? So now anyone can decrypt that message because you have the public key of that certification authority. Once you decrypt it, it will say this key belongs to Alice and here is the key itself. Okay? So you can extract, anyone can extract the key. So all that the digital certification authority has done is signed the key, which means encrypted the key with their private key and then sent it out. Okay? So that's what a certificate does. Okay? So certificate is nothing but a certification authority simply encrypting a string, which is somebody's public key and their name, okay, with the certification authority's private key. And the public key is already assumed to be known and string. Okay. So if you do this, all of our problems go away because you cannot substitute public keys anymore. The worst that can happen is you don't get somebody's public key because maybe you published it on the website, somebody went and hacked your website, deleted the page. That's okay. That doesn't do any harm. You can't just decrypt the message anymore, but doesn't mean you get then decrypted with somebody else's key or anything like that. Okay? And furthermore, certificates can be revoked. Suppose that you lose your laptop, it had your private key in it. Okay? So now you might think my private key is now gone, it's gone, some intruder can have it, and now they can sign messages or do bad stuff. You can actually revoke certificates. Okay? So that there's certification authority can go and revoke an old certificate. So when you try to decrypt it, it will say this has been revoked, and so the revocation is built into it. Okay? Often there are expiration times also built into it. Certificates don't last forever. Okay? Many times when you connect to a website, it says certificate expired. What happened is certificates last for a year or 6 months. If you don't renew the certificate, it expires. Your browser will refuse to believe that that's a valid signature from the certification authority. So you have to get the certificate reissued after it expires. So all of these things are built into these protocols. Okay, is that clear? Any other questions here? Yes. Yes, the private key is only known to the certification authority. Certification authority is trusted, so we assume they have good security practice that they safeguard their private key. Public key is assumed to be already known. Okay? It's built into every browser. So you should, next time you browse any website, do a few things. If you have an HTTPS connection, you see that lock, okay, in the browser bar, click on that lock, it will show you the certificate that was downloaded. Okay? That shows you that that server has actually presented or the website has presented a certificate so that you can validate you went to that website, not somebody else. The second thing you can do is you can actually go into the browser's preferences under security. You can actually list the names of certification authority your browser trusts, and you'll see all the ones that are built into it. And those are the only ones it will trust. If some unknown certification authority signs the key, your browser will say, I don't know this certification authority, so do not trust this. It will throw a warning, okay, saying certification authority unknown or something like that. So there are some number of certification authorities that are in your browser or any security client. Only those certificates will be accepted. So you can actually go verify all of this and figure that out. Okay? But yes, the private key is assumed to be secure. Okay? And that's known to only the CA, not anyone else. Okay, so with that, let's talk about a few other things quickly. There are lots of other things in security I did not actually cover. I just want to go through this list so that you see security in networks and distributed systems, very complicated problem. We've just talked about encryption, but lots of other things are actually in play. There are firewalls that actually look at every packet that's either coming into the system or going out, and you can just decide which packet to let in, which packet to drop based on security policies. Okay, you can have virus and email scanners that are actually looking at the traffic. You can have secure networks, which are called VLANs. You have radius servers, those are just password servers. You can have secure Wi-Fi. Okay, you should not actually connect all to unsecure Wi-Fi. If you have the secure Wi-Fi, you will usually have a key or a password that you use to authenticate that secures your traffic, so no one can spoof your Wi-Fi traffic. So you secure your Wi-Fi. You can have VPNs to make secure connections. I talked about certificates already. I'm going to talk about SSL in just a moment. So lots of complex things that have to be put in place. And then there are many other things for authentication. You have secure HTTP. I'll talk about that. You have challenge response authentication. Now you have two-factor authentication, right? So you, in addition to your password, you may need an authenticator app, or the service might send you a text message. You got to have a second password, which is usually one time that is used. So that's another layer of security. Get two-factor authentication, as I talked about nonces already. So all kinds of things in place, because there's security is a big problem. Okay? Just putting encryption doesn't solve the problem, because somebody said, what if you could flood the service and bring it down? Okay? That's a denial of service attack. So all kinds of problems require many different solutions. We only talked about one, which was authentication, and then we talked about signatures using encryption. But lots of other things to keep in mind, which we did not cover. That's a topic for a distributed system security class, not this class. So we will not go into this. But I do want to show you a picture of what a firewall does, just in case you actually have not taken a security class and are wondering. Okay? So what is a firewall? It's actually a machine, okay, that has to think of a machine with two Ethernet cards. Okay? So there is traffic coming in one and traffic going out of the other. Okay? So this is basically incoming traffic, that is outgoing traffic. Okay? There are two cards, so it basically connects to two networks. So the machine sits between the internal network and the internet. Okay? So all the traffic from the internal network arrives at the firewall, and then it has to go out from the other net card out to the internet. All the internet traffic comes on that port and has to traverse through the firewall. So all the traffic has to flow through this machine. That's number one. Okay? So what happens is, whenever a packet comes in, okay, every packet and TCP/IP packet will have four pieces of information at least. It will have a source IP address, it will have a destination IP address, it will have a source port number, it will have a destination port number. Okay? The IP address, port number of the source, IP address, port number of the destination. Okay? So what the firewall will do is, for every single packet that's coming in, it will actually check, should I forward this packet or should I drop the packet and delete it? Okay? To do this, you are going to actually check a set of rules that have been pre-instantiated. Okay? The rules typically will say, allow all traffic from this IP address range, or deny traffic that is to this port number. Okay? You can construct, as a firewall administrator, any rule you want. Okay? The default rule is allow everything. Okay? So if there is no other rule, every packet will come in and the rule says allow everything, so it will match that rule and it will go in. Okay? But you could say stop all packets from this IP address. So if a packet comes in, that rule matches that packet, it will get dropped. Okay? Or you could say only allow traffic from this IP address. So only packets that come in and match those rules will be allowed. All other packets will have no matching rule, will get dropped. Okay? So you can do this both ways. Okay? Incoming traffic can be filtered. This is called filtering. Outgoing traffic can be filtered as well. So you can put in all of these rules and then figure out what comes in, what goes out, which ports are open, which ports are closed, and so on. Okay? Typically, if you have a home Wi-Fi access point, okay, that has a built-in firewall, you can actually go configure rules. It comes with some good default rules that you never have to worry about this, okay, because it will not allow any incoming traffic to come in by itself unless you have sent an outgoing packet. So that means intruders can't come in, but everyone from inside can go out. That's the default rule. Okay, so allow all traffic from in to go out, but don't allow any outgoing traffic to come in unless you initiate that connection first. Then you are allowed to have return traffic back. Okay? So that's essentially a very quick 2-minute version of what firewalls do. Okay? So that has to be put in place in addition to encryption and all of these other things for you to do. And you have more complex firewalls than this. This is just doing packet level filtering. You can do application level filtering. You can look at inside a packet and try to search for viruses and say, if I see malware in the packet, don't let it in. Those are called deep inspection firewalls, DPIs. Okay? So all kinds of additional things, but by and large, you have to inspect all the traffic that's going in and out and decide whether to let it in or not. Okay? That's the role of a firewall. Okay? So I already mentioned all of this, so I'm going to skip this. Okay? I'll talk about access control and then we'll talk about a few other things. So the other thing that you have in secure systems is a list of policies that says who can access what. Okay? So you will have not just username, password, but you will access control, which say these users can access these machines, these users are prohibited from accessing these machines, these services. So all of that is done through what are called access control lists or capabilities. It's just a big table that says, are you allowed to perform certain operation, or is this process allowed to make certain operation? So just as firewalls check traffics, okay, access control list check operations. Before every operation, you check, is this operation allowed or disallowed? And if the access control list shows you're allowed, then the OS will let you perform this operation. Otherwise, it will deny the operation. So ACLs or access control lists are the equivalent of way by which an OS can allow or prevent operations from occurring. And firewalls are the ways by which you can prevent traffic from going in or out. Okay? So they go hand in hand in terms of how you are going to put security controls. Okay? One secures traffic, the other controls which files are accessed, what libraries can be accessed, what operations you can perform. Okay? So I just want to mention that very briefly. But now let's talk about some more interesting things. Okay? I'll have 2 or 3 quick case studies. One is secure email. And if you have some time, I'm going to talk about secure payments or digital cash and things like that. Okay? So how do you, now we have all the concepts to think about how can you build a secure mail application. Okay? So by default, mail goes unencrypted. Okay? That should be clear. You send a mail to someone, there's no encryption. Somebody can capture it. Your mail is actually going to be seen by someone. Okay? But you can actually send encrypted email. Okay? How are you going to do that? Okay? So the 4 requirements for secure email: we want secrecy, which means we only want the intended recipient to read that email, no one else. That's called secrecy, right? We want sender authentication, which means that when you receive an email from someone, you should be able to authenticate that someone sent it. It was not sent by someone else, spoofing to be Alice, for example. Because you want to authenticate it came from someone. You want message integrity, which means that you want to ensure that nobody changed the message in transit. Because emails do go sit in inboxes and they sit at intermediate mail servers and so on. Somebody could go and alter the message. Okay? You want to guarantee that the mail was not tampered with. Nobody modified it in transit. And your sender authentication, it says only the sender should be able to read the message, nobody else. Right? So those are 4 things. So secrecy we know how to do. Okay? We are going to use encryption to do this. Okay? So as I already said, if I want to send, Alice wants to send a message to Bob, Alice can take Bob's public key. Okay, well known, we'll use certificates now so you don't get the wrong key. I will encrypt the email message with Bob's public key, send that email message. Okay? Only Bob can decrypt this message, so automatic secrecy in this case. Right? So there's no problem, we know how to do this. Okay? But public key cryptography, very expensive. I already said this. So you really should not use public keys to encrypt large messages because it's going to be expensive. So what can we do here? We can use session keys. Okay? So what Alice can do is Alice can generate a symmetric key K. Okay? Some random key. You don't have to tell what that key is to Bob. What you will do is you will take that key, you will encrypt the email message with that key. And hopefully that key is smaller than the public key, so it's more efficient. Okay? So you just have a session key. You generate a key K, you encrypt the message with K. Okay? So now I have an encrypted version of the message. Okay? Then I'm going to take that key and I'm going to encrypt the key itself with Bob's public key. Okay? So then I send the encrypted version of the message and the encrypted key in my email. Okay? When Bob gets the email, the first thing they have to do is they have to use their private key and extract the key because it was sent encrypted with their public key. Okay? So I get the key out. Then I take the key and then I decrypt the message itself. Okay? So 2 levels of encryption. I use one encryption algorithm, which is cheaper and more efficient, but still quite secure to encrypt the email itself. And then I take the key of that encryption algorithm, I encrypt it with an even more secure algorithm, which is public keys, and then send both of those. Okay? That is going to be more efficient than just using public key to encrypt the entire message. Okay? So that gives us secrecy. It doesn't give us any of the other properties. Okay? So now let's talk about authentication and integrity, but no secrecy. How do you authenticate this message? We apply digital signatures. I showed you how to do this, right? So I'll take the message M. Okay, that's my email message. I'm going to apply a hash function to the message. Okay, so I get a hash of M, H of M. Then I'm going to create a digital signature. Okay, I'm going to encrypt it with my private key as a user. Okay, so this encrypted hash serves as my signature for the email. Okay, so then I'm going to send the message M in this case is yet unencrypted, and the signature to Bob. Okay? So Bob can verify that I sent the message because they can take my public key, decrypt the hash, okay, because it's now encrypted. I take the original message, I compute the hash, I compare them. Okay? And then if they compare, then that means I signed them. You can't, the message here is going unencrypted. So if someone tampers with the message and modifies it, what I will receive, what the other person receives M prime, not M. In this case, the hash of M prime will not match H of M. So Bob will say that what has come was not signed by Alice, because this message doesn't match, the hashes don't match. Okay? So even if the message is going unencrypted, the signature allows me to check whether it was tampered, and it also allows me to check that Alice sent it. Okay? So I got two of my properties, did not get encryption. Okay? So I can take the previous technique and this one and put it together. We will get all of the properties. Okay? So what are you going to do? You are going to take the message M. Okay? You are going to hash that message, and then you are going to sign the message, same as before. Okay? So I have now the hash of the message, which are signed. So then I take the original message and the signature, okay, and I concatenate them. So I have the unencrypted message and the signature. That's the new email I want to send. We'll call that M prime. Okay? M prime is the thing I'm going to encrypt. Okay? So I'll generate a session key K. Okay? I will then encrypt that entire M prime. Okay? So I will now I have an encrypted version of an email message, okay, that has my signature and the message. Then I have the key, which I'm going to encrypt with Bob's public key. Okay? So the key is gone with the public key, encrypted with the public key. I have the encrypted version of M prime. Both of those go. Bob first extracts the key, okay, decrypts the message, and M prime comes out. And you essentially take the hash, and then I validate the hash. Then I know that Alice signed it. It was not tampered. Okay? So I took those two concepts, I put it together, I got all of it. Okay? That's how a secure email application actually works. Okay? You can just do signatures without encryption. That means messages are going unencrypted, but a mail client can check the signature and see that nobody tampered with it, and you actually sent it. So no one can spoof your messages, neither can they tamper with your message. But someone can read your messages. Okay? So if you don't care about whether someone is reading your messages, but just want the other party to validate you sent it and didn't tamper with it, signatures are fine. You can just attach a signature to every email, all good. Okay? But if you also want only the other party to read it, but no one else, you got to encrypt the message itself, not just sign. Is that clear? Okay. All right. So with that, I'm going to talk about two final things. One is secure sockets layer, SSL. Okay? This is how your browser is going to set up a secure connection with the server. So far, you use standard HTTP in your labs. It was not secure. Right? So everything that was going back and forth was going on an unsecure channel. So how can you actually use SSL? We'll use the same ideas we have done before. Okay? Essentially, the browser now has to set up a secure connection with the server. Okay? To do that, you got to get a session key. Okay? So here is how it's actually going to work. Okay? So this is a set of messages that you'll exchange. Your browser will first open a TCP connection to the server, okay, and say, let's set up a secure connection. Okay? The server, the first thing it will do, it will send its certificate over. Okay? The certificate has its public key. Remember that, because the browser first needs to know the public key of the server before you can do anything. So the first thing that comes back on the connection is the certificate. Okay? Certificate is signed by the certification authority. So browser is going to check, is this the right certificate? Am I talking to the right website? Okay? So if you have an incorrect certificate, it will complain. Okay? So now that you have the public key of the server, okay, the browser, okay, so you can see that you lose your list of certification authorities to decrypt the public key. So now you are going to generate a session key. Okay, browser will generate a session key. It will encrypt the session key with the public key that the server just sent you. Okay, and it is going to send that encrypted key to the server and say, let's encrypt future messages. Okay, so saying, let's start encryption. Here's the key. Okay, the key is gone encrypted over the network. The server will receive it. It will decrypt it because it knows the private key. Okay, so the key will come back. Now you just exchange a key between the browser and the server. So all further messages are going to be encrypted with that session. So you are using your public and private keys to bootstrap a session that's encrypted with the key that you just exchanged as part of that process. Okay? And since you are using certification authorities and all of that, there is no way an intruder can actually insert the wrong key or anything like that. Okay? So then once you do that, your HTTPS session will start. That's when you see the lock symbol appear on your browser. Okay? All of these things happen before that, and then all the traffic is encrypted at that. Is this clear? Okay. Okay. So very quickly, we have only 5 minutes left. I'll talk about how you can use encryption to have digital payments and digital money. Okay. Because you can use the same set of ideas to build this application where you can make payments and so on. Okay. So to do this, let's understand how payments work. Typically, you can make payments in cash. Okay. You can use checks. You can use credit cards. So these are very standard ways you can do this. Question is, how can you use digital money? These days, now it has become cryptocurrency, but even if you don't have cryptocurrency, can you still have digital cash? We'll talk about a little bit of both. Okay. So first thing you should know is using cash is anonymous. Okay. You walk into a store, you buy something, you pay with cash, they don't actually know who you are. Okay. If you use cash or credit card, that's tied back to you. Okay. Your check actually has an account number. You can go to the bank and figure out who made the payment. Same with your credit card number, it can be connected back to you. Cash is the only thing here that's anonymous, that allows you to make purchases without revealing your identity. Okay. Now, we want a digital version of cash that will have that property. We'll get back to that in a moment. There are 3 pictures here that just show you how checks and credit cards work. Okay. Check should be, so cash is very simple, right? You go to ATM, you withdraw cash from your bank, you go to a store, you pay them, they go deposit in their bank. That's how money is flowing back. Okay. But the transactions are anonymous. Okay. Checks, what happens is the bank issues you a check, you go to a store, you write a check, you sign it, the store will then present it to their bank and your bank then runs what's called a settlement process, where they present the check, it's validated that you signed it. If a signature doesn't match, your bank can refuse it. Okay. If it matches, then the bank will send the payment to the merchant's bank, and then they get it. Okay. So the money is actually exchanged not by the person and the merchant, is exchanged by banks. So it just shows up in your account. Okay. Unlike cash that you get. Okay. Credit cards work the same way. Your bank issues your credit card, you go to the merchant, okay, and you give your number. Okay, that is processed as a transaction. Usually a third party is involved, like a payment processing network like Visa or MasterCard, but ignore that for a moment. Okay. That does a transaction, then that goes to the merchant's bank. The merchant bank will then send that to your bank, and then they will send the money over, and then you have to eventually pay the bill. Okay. Both of the checks and credit card things you can be tracked. Okay. Does not give you anonymity, but gives you convenience. You don't have to carry a lot of cash, because cash is anonymous, but it can be stolen. Okay. That's, in that sense, the credit card is a little more secure, because if it's stolen, you can freeze it and what. Okay. But here's a way you can essentially do e-cash, which gives you similar properties to what cash would do. Okay. So you want the money to be anonymous. So here is what you're going to do. So if you're a payer, first you will generate a blank coin. Let's say you want a $10 coin that is sent. So you will generate the coin. Okay. The coin has a serial number. Okay. It's like a piece of money that all cash pieces of bills also have a number on them. Right. So let's say you say, here's $10, you have a unique sequence number on it. Okay. You will put that in an envelope. Okay, not a physical envelope, but think about it. You'll blind it by saying, I will essentially mask the number, okay, and then I'll send it to my bank and say, sign this. Okay. But the bank will say, such and such person, well, it's not saying such and such person, it'll just sign it, okay, and it'll deduct that much money from your account. It's like you withdrew that money, but instead of giving you physical bills, they gave you a digital bill, okay, and it's signed by the bank, saying this is valid for $10. Okay. Then you just take that money, you unblind it. Now it has a number that you have, and you have bank signature, and then you can go to a merchant and present. Okay. Now what the merchant has to do is they have to go and verify with the bank that they signed it. Okay. Because you can, it's a digital thing, right? You can present it to 2 merchants. and you don't want to allow double spending. So the bank will validate that this is the first time it's being sent and say yes, okay, and then it's done. You used it up. If you give this same digital coin to another merchant and they validate with the bank will say it's been spent. You can't use it again. But they will validate that it's their signature, but they say it's okay. So this is how it's actually going to work. So bank has a signature, and then you given the signature. Just question. Like the bank knows you requested the money, but they don't know the number that they have assigned to the bill. So when they come back, they just know that they issued this currency and they signed it, and it can be only spent once, but they don't know who it's associated to, because you blinded the coin, right? So you assume that each piece of currency has a unique number, so it can be tracked, but you blinded it and they signed the blinded version. Okay? So then you unblind it and use it, so it can be only used once, so it cannot be tracked back to you. That's what is actually happening here. Okay? Is that clear? Yes. What's an example of something that uses it? This was actually a protocol that was built for digital cash, never took off. Okay? Unfortunately, because people have better things to do, like do cryptocurrency. So anyway, so that leads us to the next thing, which is cryptocurrency. I just have two slides. We are not going to go into this in detail or anything like that. So the digital cash never really took off, but what is actually being used, which gives the same properties, are all these different types of digital currencies, one of which, and the most popular one of which is Bitcoin. It has similar features. It guarantees you anonymity and all of these things. But and there is no bank in cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrencies are decentralized, okay? But every transaction is tracked anonymously. Okay? So the way cryptocurrency works is there is a big database. Okay? And that database tracks who actually has which coins that have been issued and who has transferred the coins from to someone else. Okay? So that entire record is actually public. Okay? Except that the owners of the coins are unknown. Coins just have numbers. You don't know who owns them. All you know is this coin was transferred from this anonymous party to some other anonymous party. So there are anonymous IDs, but you don't know who these actual people are. Okay? So that entire database is public. It's called a digital ledger. Okay? And that's basically also called a blockchain. So that digital ledger is a blockchain. So blockchain, distributed database. Okay? Now, every time you want to spend this coin, you are transferring ownership of the coin to some other entity. That transfer has to be logged in the blockchain, so you know that now this coin belongs to somebody else. Okay? So that is always going to be logged. But to do this in a good way, you have to ensure that that ledger is updated in a secure manner. Okay? You want to ensure that transactions are recorded well. You want to ensure that you can go back and check it. You have to essentially use consensus, because there is no central authority. Database can't reside on any one machine. It's distributed across a set of machines. Okay? Updates have to be run using Byzantine consensus, not Paxos or RAF, but Byzantine consensus, because bad actors can try to insert bad transaction and so on. So you need Byzantine consensus, which we have not studied. Okay? But essentially adding an element to the ledger requires you to run a consensus protocol saying, do we all agree this transaction is valid? If you all agree and we made sure this Byzantine agreement, then you add it. Okay? So that's how you are actually going to keep track of how you spend this money. Okay? And in Bitcoin, you have this additional thing that says that the way coins are generated is through a process called mining. Okay? You essentially participate in the blockchain protocol, and if you do enough things or you're fast enough, eventually you get rewarded by creating new money that comes to you. This gives you incentive to participate and maintain part of the blockchain. Otherwise, there's no central authority. Why should anybody participate? Right? So very quickly, blockchain is a public ledger of transactions. It tracks all the transactions in the system, okay, anonymously, but everything is tracked. So you know that ownership was transferred and so on. So there are applications where you can have wallets to keep this, etc. But then you can sign it and then put that in the block. Blockchains can be used beyond cryptocurrencies. Just a public database. They could be used for all kinds of other uses, like public land records and anything that's public record, you can put into a blockchain if you don't want a central authority to keep it. Okay? If you want a decentralized authority, you can use this layer. This most common use is in cryptocurrency, tracking financial. For any other transactions, you could use a marriage records, land transactions, stock registers, smart contracts that are public. You can all track to this. So essentially, you're using distributed consensus, and I'm going to end with this slide that shows you the whole chain. Right? So you want to make a transaction, you're first going to essentially take some cryptocurrency you have and say, I want to transfer it to this other entity. You have public keys for those entities, not their private keys, but they're anonymous public keys. You send it to this blockchain service, which is a distributed set of nodes. They're just maintaining this distributed database. Now you want to just append an entry to the database. They'll run a consensus protocol. And if they all agree, your transactions get added. At that point, the ownership of that digital coin gets transferred to the new party. But now it's recorded in the system that you just gave that to someone else. Okay? And then essentially, once that is done, anyone can go and look at the ledger. So you can't claim that I didn't spend it because there's a transaction there that showed you transferred it to someone. So that public ledger is public. And once you actually transferred the money, then whatever you spent it on, you can actually get those goods and so on. Okay? So that's the general idea of how blockchain works. There's a lot more details, of course. We didn't talk about how the mining process works or how the distributed consensus works, but that's topic for a different class, not this one. But you should be clear at least some of the concepts, how encryption is used and so on, which we talked about, how they apply here. Okay? So in any case, I'm a few minutes over time. So we'll end it here today. That's the last class. Hopefully you like the course. Okay? We still have an exam next week, so I'm going to send some details about it. So make sure you read that carefully. Okay? And last but not least, if you're graduating, congratulations. Hopefully I'll see you at graduation ceremony. Otherwise, have a good summer. Okay? So let's end it here. Thank you.